What I want to talk to you about today is what to do with your thoracic and your lumbar spine and how to allow it to stretch. So your thoracic spine can rotate forward, your thoracic spine can rotate backwards. So this is item number one that I want you to be able to track and think about in your dance. When you're stretching, is your thoracic spine coming forward? Or when you're stretching, is your thoracic spine going excessively backwards, right? So when you stand up with proper posture, there's a dysfunctional option for this, right? Dysfunctional is forward. Dysfunctional is also back. You don't want people walking around like this. This is kind of ridiculous. And for your pelvis, you can rotate too far back, right? This is posterior pelvic tilt. Or you can rotate too far forward. This is anterior pelvic tilt. You can also shift the two relative to each other. We generally don't consider this to be a dysfunction. It's more if I'm working on something in front of me, I want to shift my rib cage forward and keep my hips back. But I want to maintain a neutral pelvis and a neutral upper spine when I shift. Right? If I shift to the left, I want to keep my upper spine neutral. I don't want it to tip forward as I shift to the left or tip back as I shift to the left, because now if I come up here, I have posterior thoracic tilt. So there's posterior pelvic tilt, which looks bad, posterior thoracic tilt, which looks bad, anterior thoracic tilt, which looks bad, and then if you combine that with anterior pelvic tilt, this is what most people look like when they're pitched forward. And then as they unpitch back, they still have that anterior pelvic tilt and that anterior thoracic tilt. What I want you to do is when you're dancing, I want you to activate the erector muscles of your spine to keep you from getting, as people pull on your arm, to prevent the thoracic spine from going into anterior tilt excessively. I want you to keep your back up. That doesn't mean I'm asking you to use your erector muscles so strong that you go into posterior thoracic tilt. And I also don't want you to use your pelvis muscles so strong that you go into posterior pelvic tilt. I just want to prevent when you get pulled on, I don't want you to hit this position as somebody pulls on you, because this is anterior pelvic tilt. I want you to keep your pelvis and your thorax both vertical, but still being able to shift. So as I go into stretch on an anchor, I want to keep them mostly neutral, because neutral is great for leg. My legs are nice, they can move back, they can move forward, that's great. As I start to go into anterior tilt, I lose a little bit of my forward range. I can't move as far forward, but if I'm in a neutral position, it's just how the hips are meant to exist, is in neutral. And also the thoracic spine is meant to be neutral as well. So I should be able to shift these back, forward, side, etc., and keep my thoracic and pelvic tilt neutral. So from the side, shifting, I should be able to keep my thoracic and pelvic tilt in this direction fairly neutral, versus kind of having to lean forward, or as I shift to the side, having to lean back, or with my pelvis as I go to the side, having it come forward and collapse like that, or as I do this, collapsing backwards. If you're noticing that some of this contradicts with things I've said in the past, that is 100% true. I've had to think about this a lot, but the muscles that are activating in general, because most of the time you're being pulled forward, are the muscles that rotate your pelvis back, because you're preventing it from going into this collapse position, and because you're also getting pulled forward at the shoulder, you're using the muscles that prevent your thoracic spine from coming forward. So you're actively pulling this back up, not so much that it does this, and not so much pulling back of the pelvis that it goes all the way into posterior tilt, but you are activating those. And then in stretch, you should let yourself pitch forward, right? But just flat pitch, like I was saying a while ago, is like this. This is what I thought people were doing, and I found out that they're not doing this. They are doing this. The difference between this and this the difference between the first option and the second option. The first option is just tilting at the glutes and just rotating the pelvis. This is bad because now I have anterior thoracic tilt and I have anterior pelvic tilt. So the solution is to move more from this midsection, keep a neutral pelvis and a neutral thoracic spine, and just shift them. So if I can dance here actually pretty much the whole time. I can do a whole move in this type of position where my knees are slightly bent and my thoracic spine is ahead of my pelvis. What you don't want to do is you don't want to dance with your pelvis behind your thorax, like you'll see some people do. They might have a good neutral pelvis and a good neutral thoracic spine, but they're dancing here. And this makes it very easy to fall over backwards. If somebody lets go of the connection up top, you go flying backwards. Whereas if you're here, it's much easier to shift back. As you get let go of, you just come back into a more vertical position. Another thing is that for most of us, this is a very flexed position, which means we naturally want to snap back into standing vertical. So if I'm going to do a move and I'm going to go into stretch, I'm naturally going to kind of rebound back up into both of them straight. Whereas I don't really feel that flex if my pelvis stays rotated forward or my thoracic spine stays rotated forward. I don't really feel a stretch here, but I do feel a stretch here. I feel it right along here and a little bit in here, whatever's tightest on you. That's going to want to make you pull back in line.